When I used to go to work, man, I used to wear heels. I used to wear red lipstick. I was like, kids, we're going to learn today. Learn about your environment. Learn about your planet. Learn about this country. Learn about the rules. Learn about the arts. Learn about painters and sculptors and philosophers from our century, from Egypt, from the Assyrians. There is a whole world out there that you, for some miracle, have been brought to be a part of. Who are you in all this? Let's get to this. We talk about books. Most teachers open the book, chapter 1. Who's going to read the first sentence? I walk into teachers' classrooms. I'm like, this bitch is boring me. What's up, Jay? Welcome to Raw Food. 2 ex-Cal grads chopping it up. East Coast, West Coast. What'd you say?
You love dropping that birthday card.
Oh my God, did I mention Cal?
No, we was just in the middle of a conversation and you made some really good points. So I just wanted to hit the record button because hit that one more time. We know so much about how to develop children. There's tons of research that has been done about this, and everything that we do when it comes to schools is antithetical.
The contra-positive. It's the contra-positive, if you will, of everything we know about children. So what do we know about kids? They like to move, they like to talk, they like to touch things, they like to interact, they like to run, they like to move around, they need stimulation coming, audio, visual, kinesthetic, they need social development. Walk into a school, what does it look like? The precursor to a concentration camp. The walls are gray. There's droppings from rats on the ground. The kids are sitting in these desks that are made from 1937 with the wood that splinters you. Nothing at this school makes a child want to be inspired and engaged in science, in the stars, in history, in your country. There's no flag. There's no indication of what country we're in. There's no art on the wall. We don't see anything. But what will we talk about? Oh my God, who got murdered on TV? Well, what does that tell us? Okay, this country hates Black people. Okay, maybe it does, but can we go outside? Is there a garden?
Mm-hmm.
When I used to teach, man, sometimes I'd tell the kids, grab your books. Let's go sit outside in the sun and do our lesson today.
Yeah. Especially high schoolers, because you only have recess in middle school.
Right.
Elementary school. Middle school and high school, you have to sit there under a bunch of fluorescent light with no natural light if you don't have any windows in your school all day. And if you get fidgety at all, they assume you're a bad kid.
No.
If you get bored.
Kids are kids. I mean, there's just some things that I think are constant about kids that I don't care all the new theories and material in the world. Give me a fucking break. I've been teaching for years. What do I notice? Boys are more fidgety than girls. Move more than girls. Do some girls like to move? Sure. Are there some boys that don't want to move? Yes. I'm not speaking for every human on the planet. I'm talking broad strokes as a teacher based on my experience teaching in 4 different states? How many states? New York, I've taught in. New Orleans, Atlanta, and California off the top. You're going to tell me I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about? Boys like to move around. So I don't have some rigid rule. You cannot move. You cannot move. Or you're crazy or you need to be medicated. How about this? Move around. We're going to move anyway. We're going to talk about this, or we're going to have a lively discussion where you get to engage with one another and you're animated and you move your arms as long as you're moving in some way. Maybe we'll go sit outside. Maybe we'll have a discussion at the lunch table. Maybe we'll go off topic today and get into something else. You know what? The kids are engaged in this. Forget this lesson we have to do. Kids, switch desks. Let's get into a debate. Keep it lively. Keep it exciting. But you walk into public schools, they're screaming at the kids. Get out of the staircase. Go to the classroom. It's like a bunch of nagging fucking middle-aged people who look like they hated being in high school themselves. When I used to go to work, man, I used to wear heels. I used to wear red lipstick. I was like, kids, we're going to learn today. Learn about your environment. Learn about your planet. Learn about this country. Learn about the rules. Learn about the arts. Learn about painters and sculptors and philosophers from our century, from Egypt, from the Assyrians. There is a whole world out there that you, for some miracle, have been brought to be a part of. Who are you in all this? Let's get to this. We talk about books. Most teachers open the book, chapter 1. Who's going to read the first sentence? I walk into teachers' classrooms. I'm like, this bitch is boring me. I'm like, fuck this. Kids, To Kill a Mockingbird. We're not even going to open the book. Why is this the title? Think about it for 1 minute. Someone do the count. 1 minute of silence. Just think. What's a mockingbird? What color is it? What does it mean? What are the characteristics? Why does the author, before we even open the book, tell us this? What does that mean? Or what do you think it's supposed to mean for you? This is a human thought. Every human thought is worth something, good or bad. What are your thoughts? Jesus, you do that in any classroom, in any planet, with any group of kids of any age group, they're going to respond to you.
You got their attention now.
You're alive.
Yeah. You're getting them to actually fire more than 2 brain cells that it takes to just read.
I don't want you to read anything. I want you to think.
Exactly.
I ask questions. I don't give answers. I don't have the answers to anything. What do I know? I've only been on this planet for, a few years. It's been around for centuries. What do I know? But I know this. I know what questions you need to be asking. Who are you? Why are you here? Why does this author want you to know what you're about to read?
It's a really good point. See, this is why I think you should be not just teaching, but like teaching teachers how to get kids engaged. Because that's the thing. Teachers at this point are so worried about getting fired for the smallest infraction. If you actually give a kid who deserved an F for not doing any of their homework, you actually give them an F, you're going to get fired for that nowadays.
And it's not the kids. It's the adults. Let me tell you something. You teach with that kind of passion and conviction in a classroom. Those kids not only know that you care about them, they are extremely forgiving when you do say things that are off because they know you mean well, that you're there. I've said bizarre things to the students where I look around and sometimes they're like, the fuck did you just say? And I'm like, I don't know. What did I just say? And we all start laughing. But why? Because I already have the collateral with them. Word. So they know even if I say something off key, they attribute it. I was teaching in California. I would say things that's normal in New York. In California was offensive. This is before everybody was offended by everything anyway. Just normal colloquial language that you use being a New Yorker. I would say in California, people, what did you say? I'm like, I don't know. What the fuck did I just say?
Because the kids know your heart. They know you care about them.
Kids know your heart.
And they know you care about their education.
And 99% of them will forgive you of anything if you are honest, if you are authentic, and if you own it when you fuck up. I've walked in the next day to my classrooms and been like, kids, I was nuts yesterday. Too far. I went too far. My bad. You know why I do it, though. Aside from the fact that I'm a little crazy, I am serious as a heart attack about your education. You know that. Is there anybody in this room who genuinely thinks I walked in here to destroy your soul and your emotion? Or do you think I'm serious about this?
Mm-hmm. That's
and
a really good point.
Of them.
Kids will give you a lot of fucking leeway.
Kids are forgiving, super intuitive, super intelligent, so ready to learn. They'll learn anything you teach them if you're genuine.
If you genuinely care about them.
Anything.
Yeah.
I've taught third grade, 4th, 5th grade, 7th grade algebra. I've taught law. I've taught 10th, 11th, and 12th. And there is one thing consistently is the same across every kid of every age group in every state I've ever taught in. All of them want to learn. All of them. So if they don't want to learn, there's something either wrong with this fucked up school, this fucked up community, or this fucked up classroom. I don't know what it is, but it ain't them.
The kids want to fucking learn, but they can spot a fake. They can spot a fraud who's just going to sit there and just be like, open page 1 and do and read the first chapter by tomorrow.
They're intuitive creatures. They are not muddled with prejudice, discrimination, hatred, bitterness, and resentment like adults are. Not until we fuck up their minds anyway. They're still on the gradient.
Yeah.
They're still see the good
until we fuck them up.
They're fine until we fuck them up with our ego and our bullshit and our fighting and our this. And what did you say? And my kid was offended. Guess what? So what's your kid offended? Be like, you know what, kid? Sometimes people are going to say things in life that offend you. You're going to say things that offend people. How do you want them to respond when you do it? Think about that in context of we are all sinners. And on the grade of 1 to 60,000, what grade of sin did this person do to you? And if it's somewhere around 8, take it on the chin and keep it pushing. There's real oppression and people make mistakes. And we have to understand that distinction.
That's the thing that also bothers me is the fact that we were just talking about how like some folks from a specific sector that unfortunately we don't want to talk about a lot, but some folks from a specific sect within Black culture, don't seem to value education as much as other sects within Black culture and other cultures out there. And it's like, wait a second, dude, there's so many Africans, there's so many West Indians, there's so many people in Haiti right now that would fucking give a limb to be able to come to the US unencumbered, get them a green card.
And go to school every day.
And go to school without dealing with gunshots, without dealing with bullshit, without
working.
Yeah.
We take it for granted our children don't work. Children work in other countries.
Oh, full time, yeah.
But we got to drag our kids to class. And when they get there, they want to talk. They're dressed like shit. When I have friends who come over from Europe to visit me, I drove them past one of the public schools I worked at. And they were like, how are kids allowed to go to school like this? They said, you wouldn't even be allowed in the building in Europe dressed like that. They'd stop you at the door. You can't come here dressed like this.
Yeah, you see these kids in African schools, they dress up.
Bro.
They go to school. Somebody walks in, they all stand up and say, good morning, good afternoon. You know what I mean? And then they can sit down when the teacher sits down. When the principal comes in, they all stand up again. Good morning, Mr. or Miss So-and-so, da-da-da-da-da. You can't get these kids to even,
manners, class. There's nothing wrong with having those things. I mean, suddenly now we're going to question teachers who've dedicated 8, 9, 10 years of their lives to understanding the pedagogy and theory behind teaching and the stages of development of the child that they're teaching, so that somebody who literally got a GED and is married to a military guy in some state can walk into a classroom and be like, hey, I'm holding the Holy Bible. I can now teach you about U.S. history. What kind of lunacy is this? When did we stop thinking?
Yeah.
And we have to take accountability, which takes us to what our initial topic was, which brought us to this conversation, Jay, was this affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court. You and I, both as people of color, have some interesting, different perspectives on this. I come from immigrant family. You do not. However, once upon a time, you tended to lean, I would say, more right than I did. And it seems like with time, I think we are crossing opposite sides of the bridge. Where are we, sir? What say you on this affirmative action decision?
I got a lot to say, and I know you do too.
Collect your thoughts. It
is very concerning, but we knew this was going to happen. With this Supreme Court, it was only a matter of time. If it didn't happen this summer, it was going to happen next summer. I'm surprised it didn't actually happen last summer when they did their first series of cases. The most notable one being when they got rid of Roe v. Wade, right? We know what this Supreme Court, this 6-3 conservative Supreme Court is all about. They're doing everything they can to kind of wage culture war. So first and foremost, people talk about activist judges, and usually they're thinking of leftists. We have a 6-3 activist Supreme Court that is a bunch of right-wing conservative culture warriors. Now, some things they have actually gotten right. They did some things when it came to voting rights that I actually was not expecting. Like they're not evil yet. They are unethical. We can get into,
but I think both sides are. I think it's problematic that we know exactly who's going to vote in what direction. I think it's problematic for both. The whole point of their job is that they're supposed to vote in a way that's best for the country. Their personal beliefs should not be revealed in these decisions. And the problem is that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, at least your culture war beliefs. Maybe your beliefs about how the law should be interpreted, sure. But your culture war beliefs shouldn't really have much of a bearing on this.
And they do from both sides.
Yeah. Now, quick time out. Setting aside the ethical concerns that we probably should do a whole nother episode about, because some of these folks are getting, they're getting gifts from big name Republican donors that they're not registering on their on whatever form they're supposed to fill out when it comes to like, here's all the income that I had, not just the taxes, but namely Clarence fucking Thomas. He's been getting a ton of just like free vacations, free this, free flight on a private jet, free, stay at this, at this
tuition for a child, I believe.
Yeah, free abortion for a child, free this, free that from these people who also happen to be big time conservative donors. And there's nothing explicitly wrong with that unless you fail to report it. And Clarence Thomas failed to report these things. These are ethical violations that it doesn't matter if it's left or right. You should not be doing that. Right. Timeout over, back to affirmative action. So Obama's Supreme Court, if you want to call it that, the previous Supreme Court, when it was 5-4 leaning in Democratic nominated or Democratic appointed Supreme Court justices, They kind of heard this about 10 years ago with the Abigail Fisher case. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I don't believe the same rubric was applied. All right. First and foremost, what happened with the Abigail Fisher case? Who's Abigail Fisher? She's a white girl who ended up going to LSU. She applied to UT, University of Texas at Austin. Great school, wonderful public school in Texas. It's like the Berkeley of Texas, right? Really hard to get in there, actually. Okay. Wonderful school. She did not get in. And she said, I didn't get in because I'm white. Now, being from Texas myself, I have heard a lot of white people say that. That is the go-to excuse if you did not get into your target school, the number one school you wanted to get into, is just to blame affirmative action. Every white person does it. Sorry, that's just the facts of white people in the South. All right. Abigail Fisher did this, and the lawyer whose name you just looked up,
Edward Bloom.
All right. Remember that name. They made a case saying, hey, we found a couple of Black kids who had worse grades than her who still got in, right? UT came back and said, hey, yes, we do take race into consideration, but that didn't give any Black students an outsized advantage, or you can't prove that it did. And you can't prove that because we took race into consideration, Abigail Fisher didn't get in because she was white. Because look, we found these students here who had better grades than her, who also didn't get in, and they happen to be Black and brown as well. Okay, so you have not actually proven that you being white caused you not to get in. You have not proven that. Okay. Oh, and it turns out she had like painfully average grades anyway. So the hashtag Becky with the bad grades.
Yeah, she was not Stephen Hawking. Right. Yeah. Let's just throw that out there. She was not Yoda.
Yeah. She was not. She did not have elite grades. It'd be one thing if she had a perfect GPA and a perfect SAT score and perfect this and perfect that and still didn't get it. Okay. Now let's move forward to this most recent affirmative action case with a new Supreme Court. Even though it's under Biden, this is Trump's Supreme Court. All right. Same lawyer, Edward Bloom. And guess what? He's trying to make the same case, but instead of Abigail Fisher, who lost her case, he used an Asian person and said, hey, I didn't get into Harvard because I'm Asian. It discriminates against Asians. But I believe, from what I've read about this case, I have not seen a clear example that clearly shows that being Asian is specifically what caused this person not to get into Harvard. Why am I saying that? Because the data that was provided to make the argument did not take major into consideration. Why is major important? Because the majors aren't equally dispersed in terms of who's applying to those majors. So the intended major of the applicant, okay, the applicant comes in, they say, hey, maybe I want to be an econ major, I want to be a physics major, I want to be a chemistry major, or maybe they say they want to do Celtic studies, something very random. Not that many Celtic studies majors, not that many Italian studies majors, not that many African-American studies majors. So if there aren't that many people applying to that major, then you're not competing against that many other students, which means it might be a little bit easier for you to get in because you're not necessarily competing against hundreds of thousands and millions of people. Whereas if you apply to physics or chemistry or economics, because I don't believe they have a business undergrad major at Harvard. I think they have obviously Harvard Business School. I don't think they have econ. I think econ is the equivalent. I don't think they actually have business there. Either way, even if they did or didn't, the point is it's a very popular major. There's maybe even 1 million kids who apply or want to apply to Harvard for those majors, right? Hundreds of thousands of people that you're competing against. And so you have to have superlative grades to get into those majors. And who is more likely to apply to those majors? The Asian people who tend to apply to those majors. Now, if there's an Asian kid who applied to African-American studies and did not get in, and they got rejected, but there was a Black kid who had worse scores and also applied to African-American studies and objectively worse across the board, worse scores, they didn't have as good of an essay, they didn't have as good extracurriculars, then I will say, yes, it's most likely that the Asian kid didn't get in because they were Asian. But show me that. Show me someone who applied to an unimpacted major or the same major as a Black student, because they're really kind of blaming this on Black people, but show me, or just an underrepresented minority in general whom you believe is benefiting from affirmative action. Show me one of these underrepresented minorities that you believe is benefiting from affirmative action. Show me one of them who applied to the same major as an Asian student and they had worse grades, but they got in and the Asian student didn't. Same major, and show me someone who did that in a major that is not impacted. It is easier for you to get in as an African American studies major, and you're more likely to be a Black student if you apply to African American studies, simply because there's not that many people applying to African American studies. All right, which means instead of having superlative grades, you'll get in with elite grades. You still have
if the competitive if the pool is steeper, then the requirements are going to be harder if there are just simply more people applying to get in under that major, which normally you do have to sort of lean towards a major in your application process. That's what I remember in mine.
Yeah, but the point is, these kids are getting these Black kids that they think are only getting in because of affirmative action, or the underrepresented minorities in general that they believe are only getting in. It's not like these people are not qualified. If they got in for African American studies to fucking Harvard, it's not like they got in with a shit GPA. They still had to have a sky high GPA and an incredibly sky high GPA or an incredibly sky high score on a standardized test, ACT or SAT, and great extracurriculars, a great essay, and all of these other things. Now, you have some data about the whole personality score that is interesting, and then we can come back and talk about what's going on with legacy students at Harvard, because those are the real ones that are getting affirmative action. To wrap up what I'm saying, I don't even think you can actually show me a Black or an underrepresented minority that you can clearly say you only got in because of affirmative action.
Well, you could also do the counter argument. It's like you got in because of your race. I mean, let's not forget that while Asians are complaining that they're being discriminated against, they also have the highest percentage of students of color who do get into Ivy League schools. Upwards of 30% Asian Americans are the makeup of Harvard. So of all the minority groups, they are the least discriminated against when it comes to the Ivy Leagues. There's something to be said about that.
Word.
To your point, legacy admissions is actually the primary form of affirmative action because it disproportionately allows kids who do not have the grades because they don't need them to get into schools based on either the fact that their family members went or their parents donated to the school. And I know that for a fact because I happen to know legacy students from Berkeley who openly admitted that they had siblings, not they themselves. They themselves actually had really high scores and were extremely intelligent people. And I do not take that away from them. Having said that, a handful of them admitted that their siblings did not have the grades, but got in because of their last names.
Mm-hmm.
What was your experience? You were a little bit more immersed into the culture, if you will, because you kind of, you linked up with groups. What is your experience?
Yeah, very similar. Either that or also getting in as an athlete. Right. Definitely, we saw Operation Varsity Blues. That happens at every selective school. I know someone who got in to throw javelin, and they went to like one practice, or I don't even think they ever necessarily even went to a practice, and they just quit the team after that. But that's how they got in, because their parents were rich, but they didn't want to come in, the legacy way. Now, we'll come back to Berkeley specifically a little bit later, because all of the UC and CSU schools actually got rid of affirmative action back in the 90s, shockingly, just a few years after the Rodney King riots. And they did it not with a court order, but with the with a proposition that everyone had to vote on.
Right.
And it's funny how, you had the Rodney King riots, and then they get rid of affirmative action a few years later. And it took a while because they went through a proposition phase to get the signatures and all that. So that's why it took a few years. But then it, just a few years after the George Floyd summer, now all of a sudden there's all this push to get rid of affirmative action at the national level. To me, I don't think it's a coincidence that this happened not that long after the George Floyd summer. Back to Harvard. 43% of white students admitted to Harvard are legacy athletes or related to donors or staff. 86% admit rate for athletes. That's what they have, an 86% admit rate. You think that's all football and basketball players?
Right.
And this is from Harvard's data. This is from the data that was presented at this Supreme Court case. So if you're going to get rid of affirmative action, are you also going to get rid of legacy admissions? Because let's be honest, we've had, legacy admissions is almost like a continuation of affirmative action for white people that we've had ever since the Mayflower came over.
And it's funny you say that, because according to an article in the Boston Globe titled "Boycott Targets College Admissions Boost Given to Children of Alumni at Harvard and Other Elite Schools," it's from the September 25th, 2021 article. It speaks to what you just said. The Boston Globe notes, and I quote, "College admissions preferences for alumni children are almost entirely a U.S. phenomenon with well-documented origins about a century ago, as Ivy League schools tried to limit the surging attendance by Jews and other immigrant populations. Today, about 3/4 of the country's most selective colleges consider applicants' legacy status in admissions. Because legacy students reflect the demographics of earlier graduating classes, they tend to be disproportionately white and affluent. According to the Ivy League schools' data released themselves, legacies make up a sizable portion of the student body. And according to the Boston Globe, the proportions are as follows. 14% of the current freshman class at Yale, and this was in 2021, 13% at Dartmouth, 10% at Brown. A Harvard University spokeswoman declined to provide that information, but the student surveys by the Harvard Crimson found that an average of about 16% of the classes from 2018 to 2025 said they had at least one parent who attended Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
According to this article, at Harvard, the children of alumni are nearly 6 times more likely to be admitted than non-legacies, according to Harvard data released during an admissions lawsuit filed by Students for Fair Admissions and was analyzed by Duke University economist Peter Arcidiacono. In the classes of 2014 to 2019, Harvard alumni children were accepted at a rate of 33.6%, compared with 5.9% for non-legacies. What say you?
Yeah, we've had effectively affirmative action for white people from Plymouth Rock all the way until civil rights in the 1960s. Okay, so if your relatives went to Harvard sometime between now and then, and Harvard University is older than the country that it's in. Harvard University was founded in the 1600s. So your great grandfather, your great grandmother went to Harvard long before, or just your grandparents went to Harvard before we had full-on integration. And yes, Harvard started admitting Black students before Brown v. Board, but not that many.
Correct.
You are now benefiting from that because they still have legacy admissions.
Well, I'm proud to say that the New York State Senate has introduced a bill to combat that. It is called the Fair College Admissions Act, the Senate bill 4170. Which would end the use of binding early decision admissions policies. It is also framed by its supporters as a response to the likely, and they were right, Supreme Court decision that would end or restrict the use of race in college admissions. And that is from the Forbes article posted May 10th of this year.
Yeah, and I give you a lot of credit because in a previous podcast, you pointed out that, yes, there's a lawsuit to try to get legacy admissions stopped, but the Supreme Court, it's not that the Supreme Court is going to vote to shut that down and say, no, we're going to keep legacy admissions. The Supreme Court just won't vote on it. They just won't take it. The Supreme Court gets to determine what cases they look at. So they just say, oh, this thing that we don't like, we're just not going to take it.
Correct.
Fuck you.
They don't have to. They have somebody who weeds out cases and presents them with the final kind of batch, if you will. And then from there, they weed out the ones that they find important to take. I don't know who makes that decision, if it's made as a collective team, if you will. But it's unfortunate that we can tell where everybody's leaning. And I find that a problem for both sides of the aisle. We should all have a problem with that, politics aside.
Yeah. Now let's go back to Berkeley real quick. Berkeley and UCLA, to their credit, after Prop 209, which got rid of affirmative action in the mid-90s, they got rid of their legacy programs.
Okay, and it's important to note that there was a precedent for that case as well. In 1978, there was the Regions of University of California versus BACK, BAKKE case. The Supreme Court ruled that a university's use of racial quotas in its admissions process was unconstitutional, but a school's use of affirmative action to accept more minority applicants was constitutional in some circumstances. The case involved the admission practices of the Medical School of the University of California at Davis. The medical school reserved 16 out of 100 seats in its entering class for minorities, which included Blacks, Chicanos, Asians, and American Indians. The rigid admissions quota was administered by a special school committee. So 16 out of 100 available seats were reserved specifically for those who could, in addition to their qualifications, add minority. That is what is important to note, that these people still, if you will, had the requirements to throw their note in the hat. Alan Bach, a white applicant, was twice denied admission to the medical school, even though his MCAT scores, GPA, and benchmark scores were significantly higher than those of some minority applicants recently admitted. He sued the University of California in a state court, alleging that the medical school's admission policy violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The California Supreme Court agreed, finding that the quota system explicitly discriminated against racial groups and holding that no applicant may be rejected because of his race in favor of another who is less qualified as measured by standards applied without regard to race. The medical school ordered to shut down its quota system, appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which reviewed the case in 1978. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision written by Justice Powell, ruled that a state may constitutionally consider race as a factor in its university admissions to promote educational diversity, but only if considered alongside other factors and on a case-by-case basis.
I actually agree with that. I do not support any kind of a quota system.
Okay, speak to that.
I think quota systems are dumb.
So you're saying they should not have held the 16 spots out of the 100?
No. I think instead, if we want to have a racially diverse class when it comes to med school, since at that point we're getting away from intended major and stuff like that. I mean, maybe they're looking at, okay, maybe do you want to do phlebotomy, pharmacology, you want to be an OBGYN? Maybe there's something in that realm, but it's still med school. Med school is still med school. Now, if you want to have racially diverse med school, you know what you can do? Let's make sure all students have access to training materials for the MCAT. And we can also help support a program where Black doctors can mentor Black undergraduate students that want to get into med school and stuff like that. Or maybe we can set up stuff where,
set up pipelines. So you want to set up a pipeline for equity.
Yeah, we can work on pipeline instead of having an outright quota system, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about med school, motherfucker, you better be able to do that med school shit. Okay, you better know your shit, because we can't take a risk with like letting someone in who might not be qualified. Now, I don't believe affirmative action in the way that we're talking about it lets in unqualified people, but a quota system might. Now, people think affirmative action and quota system are the same thing. It's not. There have not been any quota systems anywhere in the country ever since that case.
Right. And to add to that, in 2003, the court struck down the University of Michigan's use of a system that awarded quote unquote points to minority applicants, arguing that it went too far, but did affirm Bach's central finding that schools could use race as one of other admission factors. The court in 2016 again upheld race-conscious admissions and a challenge backed by Bloom to the University of Texas policies. Interesting.
Cool. So yeah, with my point about, major and, whether or not it's an impacted major or unimpacted major, to me, that also is about how you run an undergraduate school, the entirety of your undergraduate education, because you want people to come out level-headed. If you only let in the kids who applied to these impacted majors and only had, a perfect score on the SAT, rather than letting in this kid who maybe missed 2 questions on the SAT, if you just take You take let's say we're only letting in 2,000 kids, and we let in only the top 2,000 who, based on their grades alone, because people think that's how college admissions works. That's not. But we're only letting in the top 2,000 with their grades. The overwhelming majority of those students are going to be selecting the same 3 or 4 majors. It's kind of like the whole power law, 80-20. Like 80% of your students are selecting 20% of your majors, right? And so there literally would not be a need to have a fucking history program because there's only 5 students that want to major in history if that's the way you're doing it. There wouldn't be a need to have an African American studies program or a Chicano studies program or a Celtic studies program if that's what you're doing, or even an art history program if that's the way you're doing it, because there'd only be 1 art history student. There'd only be 2 theater students. You literally would not have a reason to have these faculty members. You would literally just be a college that focuses on these specific STEM fields. And guess what? We already have those. It's called Caltech. We already have those. It's called MIT. We already have those. Go to Caltech if you only want to go to a school that just has these things. But you know what's really cool about undergraduate education is you can major in physics, have these great grades and everything, but you can take some really cool history classes. You can take some really cool English classes. You could take an African American studies or Celtic studies class as well.
True.
But that's why you weigh majors and stuff like that. That's why major is such a big deal. And that is why it's harder if you're applying to a super impacting major like econ, physics, etc., versus applying to Celtic studies. That doesn't mean you get in as an unqualified student, though. That just means you're not competing against as many people. So statistically, the stats are just on your side. That's all it means. You're competing against 100 people instead of 10,000.
Well, it's an interesting point that you make, because according to science.org, the controversy around affirmative action rests on 2 misperceptions, which you were speaking to. One is the causation fallacy, the common yet mistaken notion that when members of advantaged groups are denied admission to a selective university or passed over for a job or promotion in favor of underrepresented minority candidates, that the cause is because of affirmative action. California Supreme Court Justice Goodwin Liu has argued that the real effect of affirmative action programs is too small to work to the disadvantage of Asian American admissions in any substantial way. And it's because, according to the data, according to The Week, Asians have noted that only less than 10% of them have ever thought that they were passed over for something, particularly related to college admissions, because of their race. So I found that pretty interesting.
Interesting. I don't know. I would love to see the data I was talking about before, because I don't think that data was actually presented when we actually control for the intended major of the applicant. And we really look at, give me an Asian student, give me a Black student that both applied to something like African American studies, an unimpacted major, and see what happened, and show me where their grades were at. Show me that. If you got an Asian student who did not get in, who had better grades, better extracurriculars, better personality, or throw the personality score out. We'll come back to that. But better essays, better grades, extracurriculars, essays, letter of rec, if applicable, and applied to the same unimpacted major as a Black student who got in despite being worse in all of those categories, then you can say, yeah, that person only got in because of affirmative action. And I will grant you that is not fair. I believe if you're literally going to give people a leg up doing the equivalent of what Michigan was doing, awarding points or anything like that, if anything, it should be based on socioeconomic status, not race. Because I know Black kids whose parents were fucking professors or executives at major companies in Dallas. We've got a lot of companies that are headquartered there, that are vice presidents there, and they can get a congressperson to write a letter of rec to get their kid into Ivy League schools. I went to church with kids who ended up going to some of these Ivy League schools who were Black, who, if they got any kind of boost just because they were Black, that's bullshit, because their parents were already rich. They didn't need any help. Some white kid who's living in a trailer, that person needs a boost way more than a rich Black kid. If we're going to give anybody a boost, it should be based on socioeconomic status.
Well, it's interesting that you also say that, because the other fallacy presented in this argument is that the growth of the Asian American student population, specifically at Harvard anyway, and most elite universities, has occurred in tandem with the growth of affirmative action. So it helped them.
Yeah, if you're going to do the whole correlation as causation thing, then come on.
Right. But yet at the same time, 43% of white admissions we're not really focused on, even though one of the Asian students who was a part of this lawsuit said that in the lawsuit, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I have just downloaded, and we can have a follow-up discussion on it after I read the whole thing, which you know I will. Mm-hmm. He said that in their argument, they did go after both affirmative action and legacy admissions. But for some reason, we're only hearing more about the affirmative action part.
Because that's all the ruling came out on. The ruling, right. Trust me, if the ruling took down legacy admissions, we'd have known. Well,
right. We'd have known. So I'm thinking perhaps on our regroup, what I can do is, if it's of interest, I'll read the conclusion of the argument presented in the final document that was presented by the court.
Yeah. Let's do a quick wrap up on personality score, because that seems like it was based on interviews, and it seemed like the personality scores that they were giving to Asian students, specifically Harvard, were very low, and then personality scores that they were giving to other students were very high. There were a lot of Black students who had very high personality scores.
This is something that Forbes talks about. You are right. Allegedly, according to Forbes, also the reason that it was harder for Asians to get into Harvard is that there was something called a quote unquote personal ratings, a subjective evaluation of personal qualities. And on average, Asian Americans scored significantly lower than their white counterparts. Mm-hmm. According to the federal judge, Allison Burroughs, the court concluded that the data demonstrated a statistically significant and negative relationship between Asian American identity and the personal rating assigned by Harvard admission officers, holding constant any reasonable set of observable characteristics. However, the judge also held that the plaintiffs could not prove that the lower personal ratings are the result of animus or ill-motivated racial hostility towards Asian Americans by Harvard officials.
Okay.
Maybe they just ranked lower, period. I don't know.
See, and so I was going to say, I cannot tell people from the Asian community not to feel some type of way about that, because I know I would if I saw that.
Absolutely. That actually sounds both insulting and ridiculous.
And kind of gaslighting. Really? Oh, it's not because you're Asian. It's because all of you just don't have personality. All of you, I get it. Kids are going to show up stiff, and I get it. Kids, put a lot of pressure on themselves to perform well in those interviews, and so maybe they come off a bit stiff. And I don't know what else goes into the personality score, but you don't really, if it's a crazy, a crazy gap between them and everybody else, like really you're going to tell them that that doesn't have anything to do with being Asian? You can't tell Asian people not to feel a type of way about that. Mm-mm.
Absolutely. That sounds like trash, to tell you the truth, that there was even like is there a congeniality contest that I'm unaware of? Is there, and then what? Black people go in and then they score off the charts on the personal ratings, or are they too over the top?
Right. See,
so like that what's the middle line?
They're applying
being white?
Right
I don't know. Right. Yeah, so what's the middle line then? Being like them?
Yeah. Like that's interesting to me. Like that might be how they're applying affirmative action. Like, we're just going to give this Black kid a boost. Like, it's interesting. Like, show me, are we seeing kids with like dramatically like just unqualified scores, but then they're getting in because their personality score was so high? I hope that's not the case.
Yeah, but at the same time, we can't put everything just on grades. There are brilliant people in the world who did not test well, or did not read, or didn't do well in school, or who dropped out, or who were mediocre students, but, came up with brilliant writings or philosophy. So there is something to be said about not just looking at test scores and grades. There are artists who can't, form a sentence, but can create some of the most beautiful sculptures, or invent things, or paint things, or create things in a way that moves us. And if these things matter as well, then I don't think that it's fair to say the only way you should be able to get into these schools is because of grades. Because we know disproportionately African-American communities have been disenfranchised from education for a lot of different reasons. Economically, culturally, there's a whole slew of reasons that we can go through. Lack of accountability, we can get into that. But the point is that there has been a history of inequity in education. At the same time, there is no doubt in my mind, Asian kids study their fucking asses off.
Yeah.
For the most part, not every single one on the planet, but broad strokes. Asian American kids, or at least the Asian American kids I've come across, and even the ones who are first generation, like many of my peers are, are diligent about school in ways lots of us aren't. When I first got to Berkeley, I was shocked at how many kids had already not only gotten the books for the class for the semester, but had read it already. I was still looking for the bookstore. And I'm a diligent student. But they're not fucking around because some of them are coming from countries that this is it. This is their Willy Wonka golden ticket. And they be blowing it for nothing.
Yeah.
And I respect that hustle. How can you not?
That.
How can you not?
And there are some people that will say, like, even if Black kids went to shitty schools, what does that have to do with your grades? Because if you work your ass off at the shitty school, if anything, you should be able to stand out more. I think, unfortunately, what actually happens is if you're a Black kid at this shitty school and you really take your education seriously, motherfuckers decide to start fucking with you.
Right.
They want you to let them copy your homework. They want to cheat off you. And if you don't,
they clown you.
Beat up. They're going to start fucking with you. You know what I mean? Like you get social pressure from the culture.
Right.
To like diminish yourself, to hide your light, to hide your brilliance. You get told you're acting white. Yeah, right. Acting white. Talk about it.
Right. And that's not how immigrant communities view education of any race. They don't look at it as acting white. They look at it as getting an education, period. Nor do they expect all of your learning to occur in the classroom. They are willing and prepared to work with their kids at home. And they expect their kids to work on their work at home. All they expect the teacher to do is give them the information that the kid needs to be successful in the classroom with the instructions on how to do it. And most immigrant families will tell you they expect their kids to sift through all that at home. The pressure is not on the teacher, it is on the family. And immigrant families take on that responsibility as part of their transition to this country. It's a no. And every immigrant kid will tell you that. There is no, I'm not going to school today. I don't feel well. You don't even think about saying that to your parents. There is no option. There is, my immigrant kid friends and I, we laugh when we hear like our counterparts will be like, I'm not going to school today. I got a headache. We're like, what? You can say that to your parents?
I got a headache. Wow. Yeah.
Bro, I had 8 years of perfect attendance at school when I was a kid.
You better, yeah.
My parents were like, vomit at school. Don't they got bathrooms?
They got. You better take some Pepto-Bismol, some Pedialyte, and keep it pushing.
I mean, they were like, what are you going to do at home? They're like, you're just going to sit there sick, so sit at school sick. That's how immigrants think. Either way, you're just sitting. Like, it's not like you're like plowing the soil with a mule. You're sitting, right? Well, sit with some tissues in the back of the room.
There you go.
And suck it up, Buttercup, on this episode of Raw Food.